Today on ET Connections, we sit down with Dr. Joseph Burkes, who was an early leader in the CE5 network on Dr. Stephen Greer's initial contact team. We discuss his astounding experiences with non-human intelligences, tips for making successful contact and attracting UFOs, his close encounter with military Blackhawks, and much more. Tune in for a history lesson you were never taught and discover the messages Dr. Burkes shares from his contact experience.
Welcome to ET Connections. I'm Melanie, and today we are interviewing Dr. Joseph Burkes. We are so excited to have you. Thank you so much for coming and visiting with us today. Oh, we're just so honored, and I want to just jump right in there and get started. So please, would you please tell us just about yourself? And sure. We always love those stories.
Well, my name, you heard, Dr. Joseph Burkes. I'm a semi-retired internal medicine doctor. I worked for 30 years for the Permanente Medical Group in Southern California, and then I retired about 10 years ago from that work. And now, although I keep my medical license going, I'm pretty much retired. Although I read the medical literature and that sort of thing, my wife and I live in Arcata, California, a university town on the California coast, and our adult offspring, my wife calls them her children, but I say, no, they're 37 and 42. These are adults. They're adult offspring. So in any case, they still live in Los Angeles, and so we spend a lot of time going back and forth. As a child, I was very active in the peace and social justice movements of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. My mother was a trade union activist and a left-winger and a Marxist, and I was raised in a highly secular home. I always felt that there was something missing in my life in terms of spirituality. Strangely enough, I spent time whenever I'd be in a city and I would go to a Catholic church when sermon was not on, or the Mass, just to sit there quietly and feel that sense of peace and quietness. I wasn't an active meditator at the time, but when we start talking about the contact work, spirituality, meditation, and acts of kindness are all part of the discipline of being a contact worker, which is the term I prefer to use because, as you're going to hear in a few minutes, contact is a lot of work, good work, but still, it's not so much play, it's volunteer work. So that's pretty much my background. And in 1991, there was a difficult situation. My wife she needed a studio, and so in our overpriced West Los Angeles home, we put not just an extra floor on, but we redid the whole house, and it cost a bundle, and I was working 2 jobs, both my emergency room job, plus also a day job as well for the same medical group. And so I was exhausted, and I needed a distraction. I went to the local public library, and for no reason, 1991, December, said, "What do you got on UFOs?" I had a friend who was interested in the subject as a child, and I had read science fiction, and of course, you know, I was a teenager when Star Trek came out, so I was definitely a Trekian.
That was disclosure.
Yeah. In any case, I was a big science fiction fan, but never really thought about UFOs seriously until I started reading at age 41 and 42. And after a year of reading, I went to my first UFO meeting, and there, at one of the lectures, there was a tall, bearded doctor, Dr. Stephen Greer. He said that he had a technique as part of what he called a citizen's diplomatic mission to the extraterrestrials to go out into the field and attract UFOs. Well, during the Cold War, I had been a peace and social justice activist. And when the United States and the Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear weapons, some on hair trigger alert, ready to be launched in moments, I was part of an international movement of physicians called the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. We won the Nobel Prize in 1985. And so 6-7 years later, when I was no longer active in the international physicians movement, and I heard a fellow physician say he had a program that would be citizens diplomacy to the so-called extraterrestrials. Given my past experience as a peace activist and my growing interest in UFOs, wild horses couldn't keep me away. So that's how I met Stephen Greer in May of 1992, and for almost 6 years, I was a leader in the CE5 network. First there was Dr. Greer, and then there was Sherry Adamek, his assistant, and I was the third most prominent person of the CSETI network.
What did your team look like, your first team that you were on? Was it built up of just a lot of volunteers, or was it all just scientific minds only?
It's very curious the way having friends in high places can unfold. What happened during the initial team formation was that people in a very specific geographic area all of a sudden developed a very powerful interest in UFOs. It wasn't just Dr. Burkes, but I had two other colleagues as well from the permanent medical group, because one of them is still working as a doctor, and his doctor wife asked me not to use his true name. I'll just call him Dr. Daniel, and I'll call her Dr. Maria. But from the very beginning, strange synchronicities came about that brought together our initial team, which, as I said, had 3 doctors in it. We came separate from one another to this process. And there was also several pilots. One was a 747 pilot, Joe Vallejo, and 2 PhD psychologists, as well as very highly educated people with backgrounds in psychology, film writing, and so we had several authors as well. If you go through the specifics, you realize that this showed the likely hand of an unseen intelligence that through synchronicity brought us together. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that as I describe the early days of our work.
I always find it fascinating when things start in the scientific community themselves, and then they kind of branch down, and now we are looking at, people like my husband and I, where it's just truly branching out into the general population.
Grassroots.
Everyone now is just starting to come right up, and
good.
So I find that a fascinating distinction of where it starts and where it goes. So.
Well, although we call our protocols scientific, I think it's very important to understand that contact work is not the venue of science. This is people-to-people diplomacy, perhaps, but science is very good for solving technical problems. But if you're someone who's in love and wants to write a love poem, you're not going to carry out a series of experiments to figure out what the best way is. If you're a general who's planning a battle, you may use some of the tools of science to plan, but that's not a scientific endeavor. And when it comes to contact with advanced intelligences, that may very well be ET, this is not a scientific endeavor. And I say this with some confidence because in contrast to the work of the CE5 network, which, by the way, I prefer to use the word HICE, which means human-initiated contact experiences, that in contrast to the work of us, there was the professional scientists who were brought together by billionaire Robert Bigelow and investigated the Skinwalker Ranch. Mm-hmm. And these were people from the national security apparatus, high-powered scientists, and when they were in the field trying to interact with the phenomena deliberately avoided them, so that if they set their cameras in one direction, the intelligence would manifest behind the cameras. And I think so it's a question of intent, because science attempts to have controlled conditions. When you're engaged with an intelligence that's probably more intelligent than most scientists, that may choose not to interact, science, hard science at least, is not the appropriate venue. So I think this is our birthright as people. This is people-to-people diplomacy, perhaps, but it goes beyond that, because the diplomats are chosen by the king. The kings and presidents are not choosing us. This is a job for the people of this planet to reach out to the intelligences behind the phenomena.
Why don't we jump right into the early days?
Okay.
And talk about how that unfolded.
Sure. So As I mentioned, I met Dr. Stephen Greer in '92. I rearranged my emergency room schedule, and what attracted me to initially was we were both ER doctors. Curiously, we both married Jewish women who were 5 and 6 years older than us, which is a little bit surprising. We both had several children at the time, so there was a lot of areas of commonality that attracted me, to him and his persona, as well as to the cause that he embraced. And so I went to West Palm Beach and attended a workshop. It was only $40 for an all-day workshop, $40 to join CSETI. Dr. Greer at that time was working as an emergency room physician, making more money than me. And so the financial pressures to charge high fees later on when he retired from medicine were no longer there. I mean, were not there previously. So it was, in those days, wherever you went with Dr. Greer, he was very attractive to the phenomena. You were guaranteed a sighting. And sure enough, we went to West Palm Beach. There was about 20 people. One of the rules of doing contact work is that this is not a party activity. We have an informal way of bringing people on, but it requires meditation work as well as understanding the principles behind our efforts. And so it was okay for the people who attended the workshop to be there, but people brought their husbands, wives, girlfriends, significant others, and rather than it being a disciplined attempt at contact, there was more of a party atmosphere where some people were smooching under blankets. This was on West Palm Beach where we... Anyway, so a group of 7 of us circled the CSETI leader, and we practiced the protocols, which involve meditation, thought projection, and not much happened, but Dr. Greer alerted us that sometimes when you're breaking up camp, and we were on the beach, and just as we were getting ready to leave, I got to see my first UFO. It was a blue-green light. There was a heavy cloud cover. It was maybe 200 feet up, totally silent, moving about 80 to 100 miles an hour. It just flew over us, totally silent. It was not a tracer round fired from a boat out to sea. It wasn't the planet Venus because there was a heavy cloud cover. It couldn't be a shooting star for the same reason. You can't see shooting stars when there's a heavy cloud cover. So I had seen my first UFO. It was blue-green. It was, I thought it was quite nice. I then went back to Los Angeles. Dr. Greer was looking for a working group coordinator. I spoke to his wife on the phone, and they said they were trying to recruit someone. I told them, I think you're talking to that person now. I'll be your coordinator. And so Dr. Greer came to the Valley, San Fernando Valley, where I worked for 30 years for Kaiser, and had a workshop of about 150 people there. About 40 people showed up. I should say he had a lecture for about 150 people, and about 40 people showed up for the workshop that followed. And we went out into the field, first with Dr. Greer. As soon as we got on site, a golden globe appeared just as the sun was setting in the west. It was not the sun. It was not the lights from aircraft coming on. It was an anomalous structured object that was silent, and to the west, I should say. Dr. Greer signaled at it twice, and it flared up and then faded out. Then my team went out in the field, and as soon as we started going out in the field, all kinds of interesting things happened.
Real quick, you had mentioned that the heavy cloud cover when you went out with your team, did it matter what the weather was like? Would you get more contact on certain types of weathered evenings?
It's best to have a clear weather. If you have a heavy cloud cover, the UFOs operate at various altitudes for reasons that we can only guess at. But my guess is security. If they're way down low under the clouds, I suspect they're more vulnerable. And since we are an open organization, although there are some semi-clandestine aspects of our work, which I can touch upon perhaps later, the UFOs have been targeted over the decades by various sections of the armed forces, and so clear weather is good because you can see them at great distance as for security reasons. Also, part of this work is learning to be good sky watch workers, and so having stars and being able to tell easily what the difference is a shooting star and a UFO, knowing where the planets are, knowing where the satellites are. All these are skywatch skills that you can practice when there's a cloud cover. So, clear skies are better.
No, that makes perfect sense. We've only done CE5 once or twice with cloud cover. Each time we did have contact. One time we were in Moab in Utah. We were at Upheaval Dome. Again, very heavy cloud cover, and so when we had done our thought projection, we had asked, please come under the clouds. Sure enough, I kept looking, I'm like, I need to look behind me, and there were these lights, but I couldn't tell really what they were. And after a while, we finally get out our night scope. We're like, oh, there's like 15 of them over there. I'm like, oh, okay. And we even checked, as thorough workers as we try to be, we even went to the rangers and asked,
park rangers,
is there anything over there? And we're like, there's nothing over there. There are also times where we will see a blinking light, and it will just be stationary, it will not move. And I was wondering, could that be a deep space beacon, or would you think that could be a UFO? We always leaned towards the UFO because deep space beacon, why would we be able to see it so clearly and very consistently? And we've even timed it before on our computer, and it will be like 7.4 seconds between each blink. And if you could touch on that, perhaps.
Well, sure. In terms of skywatch protocols and knowledge, you will over time become skilled by watching the stars and relying on resources. The core approach of our, for want of a better word, network, I don't think we can call ourselves a social movement yet, but that may come someday in the future, but is to interact. And so if you want to see whether something is anomalous or not, and say you see a light that's blinking every 7 seconds, if you signal at it and it flares back, and then 2 flashes, it flashes back twice, well, that's not a deep space beacon. If you say or think and project your thoughts, if you are who I think you are, please move to the left. And it moves to the left. Thank you very much. Then it moves to the right. That is not a geosynchronous satellite. If you say, would you please form a circle, and this is something I've done, I can tell you about that experience. In Joshua Tree, 1993, if you are who we think you are, we would draw a triangle in the sky, and this light, which in November of 1993 was a jumper making these tiny little jumps. It formed a triangle by making these little jumps, and then we said do a circle. We drew it in the sky with our signal lanterns, and then this flashing light traced out a circle moving around. That's not the United States Air Force on maneuvers. That's not the Goodyear blimp, and that is not the planet Venus. So if you have questions, the best thing is to try to interact with it, both with light and most importantly with consciousness, with mind.
Absolutely.
Now, one time, this was a year later in October of 1994, I was out in a team of about 7 people, and I was very active in the CSETI group at that time, although I left in 1998 for a variety of reasons. But the symbol of our organization was a triangle with a little circle on each of the apices. So while doing field work in October of 1994 in Joshua Tree National Monument, and by the way, Joshua Tree is this wonderful place. It was our field laboratory for 5 years of investigations. I've had wonderful experiences there, including missing time, which I can describe later as well. However, in October 1994, I was with my team, and we saw a constellation which we had never seen before, a tight triangle, equilateral triangle. And because the symbol of our organization was a triangle with circles on it, we all started looking at this weird constellation that no one had ever seen before. Once everyone's attention was focused on this anomalous constellation, and we were thinking, why don't I know what constellation that is? All of a sudden, one of the stars, which we thought was a star, started to move. And then the other 2 chased after it, and they faded out, okay? So if you see a star on the horizon that doesn't move and just stays there, as all the other stars are. That's not a star. If you signal at it and it flares back, that's not the planet Venus. So we started going out on our own, and I was wondering whether I had what it takes to lead a team. I was a novice. I had just started meditating again, although I took what was back in the 70s called Silva mind control. I had done meditation briefly in medical school, and surprisingly enough, it helped me find parking spaces, which it boosted my psychic ability so that I had an uncanny ability. In Boston, I went to medical school in Boston. But after leaving medical school, I really had no interest in meditation, and parking was easier in California where I resided. So in any case, I had dropped the habit, but once I joined the Contact Network, I started taking, a whole family took a TM class. And so I started doing regular meditation. Curiously enough, I had never been seriously interested in vegetarianism, but in the process of meditating on a daily basis and projecting out to what I thought were extraterrestrials a message of welcome and love, associated with that activity, within the first couple of months, I lost all taste for meat. And my wife also became a vegetarian, and we started preparing vegetarian meals. My son thought that the meditation he was doing helped his bass guitar playing, And of course, my daughter was too young to do that. So there was a transformation that was, for me, in terms of my dietary habits, quite profound. Mm-hmm. I also was hiking constantly to find what we hoped to be the ideal research site. And the mandate was it should be remote enough so that you have not a lot of housing around when you're doing the lights. You don't want the police driving by, but should be not so distant that it's not accessible. So the site selection should be remote for privacy and confidentiality and security purposes. Some people will shoot at UFOs when they see them, or shoot at us, which happened in Mexico when I went down with Dr. Greer in 1993 to the volcanic zone. So security is important, so you should be remote, but if you're so remote that it takes several hours to get there, it discourages the work. So I was going around Southern California trying to find remote places that were accessible. And I was hiking now for the first time in 20 years. I hadn't hiked. My hiking boots were 20 years old, and since I was in medical school, I hadn't hiked. So I was hiking, eating vegetarian food. I started to lose the spare tire that I had accumulated over the years because I was eating more properly. And I was getting really physically fit, and my chronic backache, which was troubling me for years, seemed to be a lot better. So because I was working out of a community close to Hollywood, where everyone knows in Hollywood it's more important to look good than to feel good. I thought here I am doing contact work, but I've lost weight, I'm physically fit. Maybe we should sell contact work as a self-improvement program. You too can lose 20 pounds and be physically fit, go to remote locations and spiritually developed as well, project messages of welcome and love, and you will be much improved as a result of this endeavor. So we had a good laugh on that one, and to recruit people on the basis of self-improvement, a total makeover, contact work style.
That's very interesting. Well, it's funny you mentioned the vegetarianism because we are also vegetarian. Mm-hmm. And it actually was our daughter originally who was leading that charge because she didn't want to hurt animals. We finally made that jump about 2 or 3 years ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we, of course, have also done all sorts of research on the effects of meat on the body, but what we were captivated by was that all the spiritual work we were doing, how the ETs, angels, our guides, when we would communicate through meditations and just telepathic exchanges, how important spirituality and vegetarianism are really linked.
Let me give you a very poignant example of what this path can do to you. When I joined the Contact Network, I was a left-wing secular. I consider myself a Marxist. Materialism was the dominant philosophy of both science and the left-wing causes that I had embraced as a youth. However, when I started to meditate, I started to grow spiritually. And one of the books that was recommended that I read was Dr. Larry Dossey, MD, an internal medicine physician who that was my specialty as well. He wrote a book called Recovering the Soul, in which he talks about the non-local basis of consciousness, not limited by time and space, which is the mechanism by which telepathy works. So I read his book, and he gave simple instructions about prayer, and he gave examples that were how prayer might work. So the first time in my life I started to meditate on a regular basis and pray. Now, my wife had a girlfriend, I won't use her last name, her name was Stephanie. She was also married to an internal medicine doctor. And Stephanie and my wife, Yael, were very close. And Stephanie was going through marital difficulties, and she was very hurt and on the phone constantly with my wife, 45 minutes, an hour every day. I felt in some ways like I was living with Stephanie because my wife was so upset about the situation. She was talking about it a lot. So I decided I'm going to pray for the first time in my life for a person. I chose Stephanie. So I would carry out the meditation first to access, as we say, consciousness in its most unbounded form. And then I would pray intently for 15, 20 minutes. It was non-directed prayer, and according to Larry Dossey's lights, it's better not to tell cosmic consciousness what to do, but to say, do the right thing, do what is natural, visualize the person, and then surrender to that universal consciousness by saying, thy will be done. So I practiced Larry Dossey, MD's recommendation about non-directed prayer. And I did this for about a week, and my wife reports to me something strange. Now, of course, I'm now an active volunteer in this in the contact network. I'm meditating, I'm not eating meat, I'm dealing with what I imagine are extraterrestrials. Clearly, my wife was a bit alarmed by this transformation, and she quite legitimately was fearful that I would follow some guru and go on top of a Himalaya mountain somewhere and abandon her and the kids. At least these were her fears. It has happened before. So she did not tell a soul about my contact work or my meditation or my prayer. But as I was praying for Stephanie, do the right thing, do what is natural, that will be done. About a week later, my wife comes back with a report that Stephanie said, and this is something very important. She said to my wife, Yael, she said, I've been feeling so peaceful, so much better, like a great weight has been taken off my shoulders. These were her very words. It's as if someone is quietly praying for me. So, bingo, I got the gold ring, and with that kind of reinforcement and affirmation, I continued with the contact network, and I still continue to pray for the people I love. Not with such dramatic results. Now, you could say, well, this is just coincidence. Well, how many times do you start praying the first time in your life? Once. Mm-hmm. How often do you hear someone say, someone is quietly praying for me? Not a common conversation. At least it doesn't start conversations very often. So, this was, I think, universal consciousness telling me, you're going in the right path, Joe, and stay with it.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, we have been finding in our own journeys as well, it's everything is just, it's all interrelated. So the nutrition of what you eat is related to your spirituality, which is related to the type of contact you have, which is related to, unlocking your own abilities that you already innately have. So.
I can give you more information about the benefits of diet in terms of contact work. Before CSETI was established in 1990-91, in 1974 in Peru, a group formed around the initial contact experiences of a young man named Sixto Paz-Wells, and they formed what was called Mission Rama. Very quickly, they had advanced contact experiences, not only attracting UFOs, which is what the CSETI group has been doing, the CE5 initiative, but they were actually having landings and boardings, and their people were going through dimensional portals, and not just one, but multiple people. And so, as part of their preparation, they were instructed by the extraterrestrials, at least those they thought were ETs, this non-human intelligence associated with the phenomena. They were instructed to meditate and to eat lightly, to fast, or simple foods, vegetables only, no meat, which they did. That may have been part of that dramatic results that they got, because they were very disciplined, followed the instructions. In 1993, when I made contact with Rama, because I had heard about Dr. Fernando Lamaco in the Bay Area is a Rama activist, and he's a retired dental surgeon. And so I knew there was a contact team in Rama. So my friend Joe Viejo, I mentioned, was a 747 pilot for United. He's now retired. He was bilingual. He's Cuban American. He went up there, and the group conducted their work entirely in Spanish, Mission Rama, because they're all immigrants. He noticed that they would spend a weekend at a time in preparation for going to do field work at people's houses, where they would pray and meditate and fast, or using vegetarian diet to open up their chakras, supposedly, or make them to have a purification process going on. But he was a rough and ready guy. Although he was spiritually endowed, he felt a little uneasy, because he said to me, you know, they sit there and pray and meditate for like 2 days, and we're not even going out into the field. And he said, I'm concerned that it's kind of like a cult. And I said, wait a second, Joe. And Joe and I, politically, when we were young men, we were on opposite sides of the spectrum. I was a Marxist, Cuban refugee from the Castro dictatorship. He and I were on opposite sides. But once we came together in the contact movement, we put aside all those clumsy battles of our youth, and we embraced the program, one planet, one people, one universe, one people. And so this program that we're involved is a celebration of brotherhood and sisterhood made large. Joe, when he said to me they're like a cult, I said, you know, wait a second. You got to remember that there are people who don't necessarily like what the contact activists are doing. There's a national security state, the NSA, CIA. They've been following this phenomena. It's been established as part of the UFO literature that infiltration has occurred into UFO groups, and you can read about it in Richard Dolan's National Security State, UFOs and National Security State, Volumes 1 and 2. In any case, some of these people who are doing contact work they don't have papers, they're undocumented immigrants, they're Spanish, and it would be very awkward if their group was penetrated and they didn't know about it by undercover agents. And so by having them meditate and fast, if an agent, and they usually were men, although some women also are working for the intelligence services. In fact, Rama had just such a case. But if a person joins your team and they have to go through all these hoops, can you imagine the consciousness of the typical CIA case officer? Probably drinks, smokes, loves his meat, and may even like to flirt with some of the younger Rama women activists. How long would that person last if he had to be in an environment where there was a lot of spiritual work going on? Mm-hmm. I imagine that even if that individual did not run screaming for his cigarettes and booze, by body language and by more subtle means, and because remember, contact team activists boost their psychic ability as part of the program, either by their spiritual practices or by getting a direct boost from UFO intelligence. And so if by subtle means, the people in Rama would be able to identify agents, even if they did not run out of the meeting. So I said to Joe, this is what you'd call a poor man's security system. Because the Rama people, some of them are undocumented workers, they're vulnerable, it would destroy their lives if an agent dropped a dime and said this one, and this one are check out their immigration status. So this is a poor man's security system. And when I explained it to him in those terms, because he had been active in groups that had an intelligence component to them because they were in opposition to the Cuban government. There were Cuban spies that would try to penetrate the organization like that. So from the security point of view, he understood that this was perhaps a poor person's security system. And then he was totally accepting of the meditation and the prayer, which he did with enthusiasm and got good results for him as well.
I would actually like to delve into this new concept that even is new to me as well, which is the virtual reality.
Well, use a virtual experience hypothesis or model.
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the great advantages of contact work is that it allows you to have skilled observers come together with multiple witnesses to describe phenomena. And one of the, well, it's a thing, but it's more than a thing. It's one of the concepts that came to me in the course of work was that UFO intelligences use illusion. They possess holographic-like technology to protect images in the sky that may or may not be physical objects, but we identify them as craft. And this is a very important concept because a lot of people believe that every light in the sky is got a friendly ET or maybe a hostile ET on. And it's important for contact activists and the larger society to realize that these are, many of them, not all, are visual displays. This is why the term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, is preferable to UFO, because a lot of what we're seeing in the sky is aerial phenomena, visual displays that may not be objects. And they may not be flying as well if they're interdimensional. They may be materializing and dematerializing in and out of our. So UAP is a better term. So how did UFO intelligences take me along to develop this theory? Well, they did it from the first week that I started doing contact work. I remember driving home from the San Fernando Valley, getting on the 405 freeway. And as I'm getting on, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe a little later, broad daylight, I see something flying that cannot fly. What it was a wooden aircraft that looked like something out of a circus. It had short, stubby wings. It was painted, and this thing is flying, supposedly. It had lightning bolts painted on its fire engine red fuselage, and it looked kind of like a biplane from World War I, except there was only one wing, and the canopy was open. It didn't have a covering. In fact, there was not even a windbreaker. And where the pilot should have been sitting in the front of the aircraft on this little thing, maybe 15 feet long, no more than 20, there was no pilot. And the wings were so short that it could not fly. It was moving about 60 miles an hour, less than 150 feet above the 405 freeway. So this thing goes by, and I suddenly realize, was that a real object, or was that a projection, either a holographic projection? So they whet my appetite with that. About a year and a half later, I got involved with this Russian contactee who presented in the emergency room. I'll call him Misha. That's not his name. He got a job as an EKG tech, a young man from Belarus. And there was a lot of things that brought us together. He was from White Russia, and my grandparents were Russian Jews. And one of them, actually, my grandfather, came from the same area. So allegedly, this young man had a dream in Russia that he would come to America, and since he was a contactee, he was having lots of sightings and other interactions. He told me that he would come to America, get a job in a healthcare setting, and he would meet, in his dream, he would meet a bearded Jewish doctor who, when he got the job as the EKG tech, there I was, Dr. Burkes, in the Kaiser Panorama City emergency room. So I was the man of his dream, which made me laugh because when I was, before I got married and was an undergraduate, I always wanted to be the man of the dreams of pretty co-eds. So I was the man of the dream of this Russian contactee. It was kind of funny. So as soon as he joined the contact team, things started to pick up, and I got a boost in my psychic ability. And this is one of the principles of contact work which I should make, and that is, just like in Hollywood, it's not what you know that gets you the job, it's who you know. And who you know, if in Hollywood, be a big shot director or a producer, if you know those guys, you're in solid, you'll get the work. Well, in contact work, it's similar. It's not what you know, how many books you've read, how many conferences you've gone to. That's not going to determine the success of your efforts. Your success is going to be determined about your ability to project love and to celebrate the slogan, one planet, one people, one universe, one people, brotherhood and sisterhood made large. And the other part of the key for success is to associate with high-level contactees that have had a long track record of drawing the phenomena to them. So by having associated with Dr. Greer, who was kind of like a magnet in the early days, and now this Russian, I'll call Misha, he was also a high-level. By having him join the team, the level of contact went way up. Also, my psychic ability was boosted, partly because I had requested this psychic ability to be boosted. I was having some problems leading because of my lack of psychic ability. So when this Misha showed up, we're having sightings now every time we go out into the field. And I was talking to him on the phone, getting ready one Tuesday morning. It was Tuesday morning, 93, 94. It was Easter week. And I remember it was Tuesday morning, and I wanted to get to the doctor's conference at noon, because they served donuts, and I certainly liked donuts in those days. Don't eat them now. It was 25 years ago, 27. So I wanted to get to conference. But the previous night, I should step back a bit. The previous night, I got a call from my friend Misha, said that he saw a UFO it was about 1,000 feet above the 101 freeway, and it was being pursued by a bunch of helicopters that he thought were military helicopters. Wow. And I said to him, wait a second, you saw a 30-foot disc at 8 o'clock at night. It's being chased by military-style helicopters. What is wrong with this picture? And he said, I don't know, I had a sighting. So wait a second. UFOs can fly circles around top performance aircraft. Top Gun aircraft. Yeah. UFOs can fly circles around them.
Absolutely.
So how are helicopters able to pursue a UFO? If this were a back-engineered craft, why are they flying it over the sand? In other words, the part of the mythology, or perhaps it's truly happening, we don't have proof yet, but a lot of witnesses have come forward, and their testimony suggests that U.S. government is back-engineering ET technology. What is the likelihood that the National Security Agency and Lockheed would be testing a mock human and back-engineered ET craft over the San Fernando Valley, where there's got 1 million people?
Right.
That would be, having helicopters pursuing such a back-engineered craft makes sense, but not in the San Fernando Valley, because if anything goes wrong, there'll be 1 million people and their dogs and cats and everybody running over to see this downed sound saucer. So I said to him, that is probably a holographic like of projection. That's a visual display. Wow. We had that conversation, and I felt, the next morning I was racing on the 405 freeway to get to the doctor's conference, and I see a helicopter flying back and forth over the 405 as it goes through the Sepulveda Pass. It's a ravine about 200-300 feet deep, and lots of fancy homes on the top, but it cuts through the Santa Monica Mountains like a knife, this 405, 12 lanes highway, gigantic. And I see a helicopter, but it's not even World War II. They didn't have helicopters. It was a Korean War vintage, old Sikorsky helicopter. Wow. With a big nozzle, and the pilot sits up on top, and it was painted candy color green. It looked like, again, something out of the circus. Right. And it's going back and forth flying well below the prescribed, I think it's 500 or 1,000 foot limit for helicopters over civilian areas, heavily populated areas. And so I'm saying, I talked to my friend about UFO intelligence being able to project images, and all of a sudden now I'm getting an image of a helicopter that's out of the distant past. Right. As I proceeded through the pass, I saw another helicopter. It was a Bell helicopter Huey that was of the workhorse of the Vietnam War. And this, too, is painted in a very bizarre fashion. I'm saying, well, if these are visual displays, maybe they're extraterrestrial. I might as well try to, connect telepathically. Mm-hmm. So I felt kind of foolish, but here I am driving in my car in traffic, and this helicopter is flying back and forth. And I said, if you are who I think you are, one planet, one people, one universe, one people. And I which is the slogan of our International Human Initiated Contact Experience Network, HICE. And to my surprise, the helicopter, instead of going back and forth, then started flying with me, came down less than 150 feet off the deck, got a little bit in front of me, and for a mile, it was tracking me, leading me into the San Fernando Valley. And I looked around because there's the San Fernando Basin where they have a dam. Sometimes they use it for shooting action movies. And there was no action movie being shot at this Sepulveda Dam. And this helicopter turned slightly sideways as I raced down. And the strange thing about it is that it was so close to me that the fillings in my teeth should have been rattling. I mean, those helicopters make tremendous noise. And all I heard was a slight sound. And these were not advanced helicopters that might have so-called black helicopters with noise dampening technology. These were antiquated helicopters. So I consider that to be an affirmation of the idea that some UFOs are visual, or UAPs are visual displays. And later, this was reinforced in even more dramatic terms. Fast forward, I mentioned this was Christmas week, 1994. Now we got to go back a little bit. Okay. Back in 1993, October, I had a prolonged interactive experience with my friend Misha, where two jumpers in Joshua Tree National Monument appeared in the sky, and we interacted with them. They were points of light that were planetoid, a little larger than a star, but maybe slightly smaller than Venus. And these were jumpers. They were flashing on and off rapidly, and they were moving in little jumps. So we interacted with them for about 2.5 hours. One of them came in within less than a mile of our position, and through binoculars you could see it as a glowing disk. And they must have been putting out a fair amount of UV light, because we did get sunburned at night. Now maybe it was a wind burn because there was a storm. However, the one that came in on the right got really close, and we were still looking at the one that was in our central vision to the east. The right side of our faces was more sunburned than the left. Wow. And so this thing that came in very close, presumably, that's one explanation. Or maybe when we walked in the wind, we just turned our face to the wind. But I don't think so.
In the face?
No, we should have been bright red on both sides.
Right.
Anyway, the sunburn faded within a few hours, so it wasn't no lasting damage. So as I mentioned before, in 1994, this phenomena appeared to be a visual display that was star-like. There was also things happening on this October 1994 field investigation that have to do with consciousness. If you're a sky gazer doing CE5 work, human-initiated contact experiences, or just like to see the stars at night, you will know that shooting stars can occur during a shooting star shower every few minutes. Well, in October of 1994, I noticed something strange about the shooting stars that we were seeing that night. If you watch the sky and doing contact work, you'll look for 5 or 10 minutes, or maybe less, in one direction, and then you'll turn and look at a different section of the sky. And for a few minutes, people are meditating, some people are signaling with lights, and people who are watching the sky get bored. They look every few minutes to a different section of the sky. What I noticed was that every time that I changed the sector of the sky that I was gazing at, I would see a shooting star. This happened not once, but 5 times in a row. As soon as I turned to look to a different section in the sky, I'd see a shooting star. And the shooting stars looked incredibly the same. Same brightness, same length of trail. And so I went to my friend Misha, this Russian contactee. I said to him, this is really curious. I explained to him what I experienced. He says, do you want to know how many times it's happened to me, Joe? I said, how many times has it happened to you that you turn your head to look at a different section of the sky and you see a shooting star? He said it's happened to him 20 times in a row. So that suggested there was a consciousness link between me personally, and the intelligence behind the phenomenon, as well as other members of the team. The following month was now a year anniversary of our November 1993 field investigation, where we interacted for 2.5 hours with these jumpers. So it was just the two of us out there. It's hard to get Southern Californians to do contact work. They somehow believe that when the temperature drops below 50 degrees, the world is coming to an end. Then to try to meditate in the cold, not move around, it's doubly. So sometimes we had trouble getting the necessary 3 people, which was prescribed by contact protocols. You have to have at least 3, preferably 3, to verify each other's, corroborate each other's impressions. Okay. So we're out there, and I'm looking at Negri Hill, which is a 600-foot prominence. We're at the northern edge of the Queen Valley in this secluded area bounded by the Queen Mountain on one side, which goes up another 1,500 feet. The plateau that we're on was 4,000-foot elevation, so it's really cold at night. And then there was Negri Hill, a 600-foot prominence that sort of made this little Queen Valley at the northern tip of the larger Queen Valley. And I'm looking at Negri Hill, and my coworker Misha says, "Oh, there's another one." And my vision was quite good at that time. I still don't need glasses for distance. I need it for reading. And I said, "Another what?" He said, "Oh, there's another one." And I said, "What are you looking at?" He says, "I'm seeing shooting stars." And I didn't see anything. So I said, "Would you show me where it was?" And I think I looked down his arm like the barrel of a gun. He says, "Show me exactly where it was." And he says, "There's another one." And I'm looking at the exact spot. I see nothing. Wow. Well, all of a sudden I'm thinking, this is showtime. This is the intelligence, like those anomalous helicopters that I was shown. It's trying to teach us something important. So I said to my coworker, Misha, ask them to show me. And before you do that, I want to ask you a question. I said, were they exactly the same? The 3 that he had seen and I had not seen. Were they the same brightness, same angle with the horizon, same location, same color? He says, yeah. And it's like you're watching a video clip going over and over again. So I said, have them show me. He said, show Dr. Burkes. And like that, in the exact location that he had pointed to, and he had seen 3 previously, I saw an anomalous shooting star. Anomalous in the sense that it was on request. Well, my heart starts beating because I realize this is show and tell, and I better pay attention. So I say to him, could you have them show me again? And he says, sure. Show Joe. And like that, in the exact location, I see a stereotypic visual display, which was just like the first one I had seen and the 4 others that he had seen. Same angle, same brightness, same color, same location. And now I'm really very excited, and I'm kind of like, we're out there in the middle of the desert, and it's winter, or it's end of autumn. And I say, I don't know who I'm talking to because there's just the 2 of us, but I'm feeling a little foolish to say, you guys, my wife calls them the whatevers, E.T. 2 is good. But we have this thing called coincidence on Earth, and if I try to tell people what happens, they say, Dr. Burkes is a very good ER doctor, takes good care of his, but he's not an astronomer, he's not a pilot. He doesn't know his backside from his elbow, when it comes to astronomy. So could you please show me one more time? Now, of course, the first 2 were just like this. And Misha says, show Dr. Burkes. It's the 3rd time. The other 2 were just like this with no pause. The 3rd time, there was a pause that was pregnant, after to say, come on, Dr. Burkes, don't you know it's us who are doing this? I waited 5 seconds. I waited 10 seconds. Finally, in the exact location, an anomalous visual display that looked like the 2 others that I had seen and the 5 others. Well, this is an incredible show and tell. What it's saying is that they possess technology where one person can see a shooting star or perhaps a flying saucer, and the other person cannot. Now, they are using a holographic technology. Perhaps they can align it in such a way that only one person can see it, or, as I learned several months later, they can project a visual display directly into your central nervous system. And I can share that information with you as well. So this is a radical paradigm that I'm putting forward, that many sightings of UFOs are using some kind of holographic technology, because if non-human intelligence linked to the phenomena can put a series of shooting stars in front of us that are not shooting stars, then they can project any kind of image that they imagine, or we imagine. That, you know, why do UFOs have lights on them?
Yeah.
Because we like lights, and we can't see them without the lights. UFOs don't need lights to fly around, but they put on colored lights that are quite pretty because they know that we like colored lights, like Christmas lights.
Yeah, like for children.
That's exactly right. So with this experience and others, I developed what I call the virtual experience hypothesis. A virtual experience of the first kind is a holographic type projection that everyone in the group can see, or it's something that's directly transmitted into the central nervous system, the visual cortex of the experiencer, where that only person who's selected will see it, and others will not. And then there's the virtual experience of the second kind, which would require a much longer explanation, but there's evidence from the literature that people who are having contact experiences, who believe they've been on board spacecraft, or the word that's thrown around is abduction, those individuals may be placed in a kind of virtual reality environment, like the movie The Matrix, a Matrix reality, where it's convincingly real what they're experiencing, and yet it's a virtual experience hypothesis where they are not going anywhere, but are led to believe through the creation of technological illusion that they are on board spacecraft. That's a virtual experience of the second kind. And this would explain why there's no photographs of people being abducted, because it's primarily a psychic phenomena. This is why people having these experiences can have them even with others are present, and the others are knocked out. They don't go, the subject doesn't go anywhere, but awakens from their bed or in a car, feeling that they've gone somewhere because the memories are so vivid, but they are virtual. The third is a virtual experience of the third kind, and this is the most controversial aspect of the paradigm that I'm putting forward. It's a model. It's testable, and that's false memories. UFO intelligence likely has the capability of projecting into people's consciousness memories. After all, alien abduction theorists speculate that people have screen memories to cover up their supposed contact experiences. If the intelligence behind the phenomena can create screen memories, which are false, why cannot the actual contact experience be nothing more than a memory which has been planted into their consciousness? I'm assuming that the audience understands about screen memories. If not, we can cover that in perhaps another time. In any case, this is the virtual experience hypothesis. It's potentially very destabilizing to our belief systems on the planet, because if UFO intelligence has the capability, as I've just described, then they can create I should say, all religions. Because if they can implant memories into people's consciousness of wonders in the sky, if they can put into their consciousness miracles that they've witnessed, then they have the capacity to create religions. And so when I talk about the virtual experience hypothesis, I'm cautious in saying this is a theory, but if true, then it suggests at least possible. Many of our wisdom traditions were created by non-human intelligence, and the saints and messengers of God that were perhaps contactees. So, but I'm not going to deal with that, because but if this is true, it gives you some understanding as to why the authorities might want to repress the phenomena, because it is so potentially destabilizing. And we can talk about how this subject threatens all terrestrial elites, if you'd like us to proceed in that direction.
Yes, actually, why don't we go in that direction? I know that Ian and I both share as we grow again in our spirituality, we are finding, we always do our research and we find the commonalities, and we like to thread things together. And the concept that this reality, reality itself is subjective, therefore it could therefore be illusionary, which means you can be manipulated, which means anything is possible, and it just keeps getting
This is
way.
the wisdom traditions of the East, and particularly Buddhism, puts forward that this plane of existence is illusion, that there is another reality that's far more sublime and more real than what we call real in this. And so the concept of the virtual experience hypothesis employs an explanation that relates to illusion. So it's consistent with wisdom traditions of the East. And Eastern mysticism is something that many people in the contact network find incredibly helpful for spiritual development. So we meditate, we watch our egos, we engage in acts of kindness, and we understand that ideas are just things, and we don't fall in love with our ideas, because once you identify with the idea as an expression of your personhood or selfhood, then you're not open to other points of view that you can learn from. So diminishing the power of ego and the identification with form, in this case I'm talking about thought form, is very important in contact work. So that is the virtual experience hypothesis. And we talked about the commonalities and the thread. I'd like to take us from the consciousness component of our work to the political and the national security implications of our work. I grew up as an activist within peace and social justice movements. I was in the civil rights movement. I helped the farm workers get doctors. When I was in medical school, I went to the farm workers clinics, and I took pictures, and I went back to Boston. I showed them to my medical and nursing community, and I helped recruit people for the United Farm Workers medical clinics. So that was one of the things I did. And I was on the left of the political spectrum. I still do consider myself to be on the left, but no longer burdened by a lot of the doctrinaire policies of the left. And so I was always curious about people, simple people, challenging power. The struggle of African Americans in civil rights. And I was a student, I participated in demonstrations desegregating the New York City school system. And I mentioned the farm workers and all these peace and social justice campaigns I was active in. And so I understood that the status quo, the power elite, whether it be racists in the South who don't want to give black people their basic human rights, or the growers in the San Joaquin Valley who don't want to pay the farm workers a decent wage, that people often have to oppose the interests of the elite to get basic rights or basic economic improvements in their situation. I realized that if ET is here, and they reflect an advance in intelligence, then they potentially would be threatening to all the terrestrial elites. Because after all, if you're a military person and your budget is dependent on your success in carrying out your mission, and your mission, say, as an Air Force commander, is to defend the United States airspace from any intrusion, and these UFOs can come and go as they please, fly circles around our Top Gun aircraft, you might not want to advertise that, because you will be shown to either be impotent to defend our skies, or you'll be shown to be incompetent and not being able to fulfill your mission. So that's part of the reason why the elites might oppose this presence. If you're a captain of industry, and say you own oil and coal, and these flying saucers are not running on fossil fuels, they don't have to fill up with gas to fly around. They're using some kind of advanced energy propulsion system. People have speculated so-called free energy from the vacuum of space. In any case, if under conditions of peace and social justice, we could safely download these advanced technologies into our technological culture without using them as weapons to destroy our civilization further. If you were a captain of industry and you'd have to compete with free energy, you might not be making the profits you've been accustomed to. So that would be one potential reason. If you're a politician who makes his or her living out of scaring the bejesus out of people and saying, if you don't vote for me, and I will defend you against the Russians, or I will defend you against the Mexican immigrants. If you're a politician that uses fear as a way of dividing people and then conquering them, so they're fighting among themselves while the super rich go on their merry way and pass the policies that they want. If our planet evolved from 150 nations to one planet, one people, and if we, as of in Star Trek, could become part of some kind of national federation, I don't know if such an interplanetary federation, if you're a politician that's made a living out of wanting to be president of the United States, you might be out of a job because people are saying we don't need to have nations, we need to have one planet, a world government based on peace. So you can see how this phenomenon might threaten.
Also the religious institutions rely on that as well.
That's right. There are fundamentalist Christian groups who say, yeah, we know E.T. and he's the devil. And that's why they oppose any kind of research. And this is what's going on within the Pentagon that's been referred to. The head of the ATIP program, Luis Elizondo, that's the Advanced Aeronautical, or also Aviation, Threat Identification Program, the ATIP. The head of that program, a defense intelligence officer by the name of Luis Elizondo, has said that part of the problem they're having in getting videos out from the Pentagon that show this long-term interest in documenting the reality of the phenomenon is that they are opposed within the Pentagon by powerful people who are fundamentalists, Christians, and they don't want anything to do with this subject because it's demonic in their view. From the point of view of the people on this planet, however, this phenomenon may not be a threat at all. When I hear that UFOs are showing up over American and Soviet missile silos and deactivating their missiles, I'm not sad about that. That says to me that they are warning us about these weapons. Now, of course, if you're an officer of AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, you are very upset about that because your mission is to protect an integral part of the United States defense program, our weaponry. So this issue threatens the elites, but not necessarily the people of the planet. And that is the basis on which I've been participating. This may be subversive, and unlike opposition from humans, the elites who can bribe people, can kill people, the so-called ETs are not amenable to the usual tools of social control or manipulation. They can't take pictures of ET in say, a Moscow hotel, cavorting with prostitutes and then blackmail them. They can't bribe the ETs because they don't really seem to be very interested in money. They show up for brief periods of time, like, hello, how are you? But they don't seem to be digging any oil wells or doing extensive mining operations. And they don't particularly mind, I should say, the bad publicity they've been getting from monster movies that show the ETs as wanting to invade us. They don't show hurt feelings and go away to play on some other planet.
Well, the only way you can actually manipulate people is through their ego. And a lot of the ET beings that want to help us have already surpassed that's not something that can be attached or attacked.
Yes, so. That's true. That's true. They are advanced intelligences, but not without a sense of humor.
Oh, I agree.
And I suppose to tell some of this humor, I should share some very intimate contact experiences in the few minutes we have left. And that is that the communication is telepathic, and that contact experiencers like myself get what we call contact downloads, where in a short period of time, a tremendous amount of information is downloaded into our consciousness. Sometimes it takes the form of an awake dream, where you're sitting quietly, and this happened to me on a number of occasions while in meditation, or in my on-call room, waiting to be called to the emergency room where I had a little time to rest. All of a sudden your mind is flooded with information. On 2 occasions, that information included when, where in the sky, and the number of craft that were going to show up. And just as I had been told in advance, the sightings that occurred were congruent, the same as the information. But other kind of information also is achieved. I remember on these contact downloads, which are sort of like dreaming, but you're awake and you have total recall. And if they can be acquired over a few minutes, but when you write out all the things that you experience, you have 20 pages of narrative. Wow. So on one contact experience, I would be interacting with my consciousness, what I thought were several ETs of different types. But I was challenging the reality of this interaction. So I was challenging the intelligences, saying, you're really just part of a dream. I would say, why don't you tell me something I don't know, rather than giving me all this highfalutin philosophy about one planet and everyone getting along. Give me some information that I don't know, so I will know that you are not me. So what I got back wasn't a voice in the head, but it was a thought form that was sardonic in nature. And what the message was, it was, if you believe in universal consciousness as you say you do, Dr. Burkes, what difference does it make whether it's your consciousness or ours? And it was like a whisper that became a roar. And then I experienced a full-blown proprioceptive hallucination where felt like my body was accelerating at a tremendous speed, kind of like when you're in a roller coaster and you go over the top and your stomach falls out. But instead of falling down, I felt like I was falling in all directions at the speed of light. Wow. And I found myself in deep space where it was cold and it was dark, and I could see in the distance stars that were faintly shining. And I said to myself, this is not Joe Burkes. I didn't do that. And so in a very kind of sarcastic or sardonic way, they taught me a very important lesson about contact downloads. I never challenged them again. Didn't want to go through that again. So there is a playful element in these interactions, which every contact worker will eventually experience. And if you have some anxiety about contact work, and many people do in the beginning, the playful elements tends to cut down on that.
That absolutely helps tremendously. We've certainly had some humorous interactions as well, and I mean, we've certainly had a good plethora of different experiences that we can also attest to. But the playful aspect, that's one of the things I look forward to most and hope for most, and I find that that's because that's something I desire, that's actually something that I'm noticing that they're more willing to interact with me in that way. Sure.
So. I'm getting another example. I had that prolonged experience in the fall of '93 with Misha. It was during a storm. Well, the first storm of the season, all the oil from all the engines that have been dripping is now, and then you mix it with water and you really slide. So on this one mission that we went out to Joshua Tree, it took us about 5 hours. And because there was a storm going on, first storm of the season, as we get closer and closer to the fieldwork site, the weather starts improving. At 4,000 feet, it wasn't raining, although you could see the storm all around us. Wow. And you could see lightning flashes coming from the west and moving across the horizon as the storm came in from the Pacific Ocean. And so we were out there for 2.5 hours interacting, and at one point, this is where the humor gets in, I got very emotional. And when I was a peace activist, we used to sing the United Nations hymn, which goes like this: as sure as the sun meets the morning, and rivers go down to the sea. A new age for mankind is dawning. Our children shall live proud and free. Except I changed it from United Nations to United Planets. And I'm singing with my best voice, and guess what happened? The UFO, the jumpers, turned off their lights. I said, my goodness, that was my best singing voice. You know, I'm a working group coordinator. How dare you turn off their lights when I'm singing a song of international, I should say interplanetary, universal beinghood? And so my coworker, Misha, is talking in the direction of where they last were seen. Of course, there's nobody out there, it's just but us and the storm all around us. But in Little Queen Valley, it's nice and dry and lovely. He says, please come back, please. And then he learned when he was in the Russian army to go like this, blow, and make a big noise. And he blows, and they turn their lights on. For those old-time movie heroes, I mean, enthusiasts, if you've ever seen Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall in To Have and To Have Not, when they showed up on the whistle, I couldn't help but thinking of the scene where Lauren Bacall says to Humphrey Bogart, says, you know how to whistle, right? Just put your lips together and blow. And when they responded to the whistle, you know, I remember that scene. So that was quite dramatic, and there was a lot of other funny stuff that happened that night.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, for me, the humor, that is just the quickest way to really get into that universal space. And, you know, because humor is pretty universal. It is just, you know, just like music, just like any other loving type of energy.
Yes, that's
I'm
true.
always joyful that that's part of that universal.
Yeah, this contact work is very joyous. There are dark sides to it. I mean, the national security state is very concerned about this phenomena. When we'd go out in the desert, on many, many occasions, there was clear evidence of surveillance. One time in the Queen Valley, we arrived with what's called a backboard. These are remote parking lots way out in the hinterland that you park your vehicle, and then you put a note for the Park Service where you're going to hike to, because if you don't show up on time, they send out search parties for you. So we're in this backboard, and a young man who looks like he can lift a fire plug. He looks like a Navy, I mean, he's built like a fire plug, and he looks like he can lift his own weight. He shows up with his Jeep, parks it. I thought he was a Navy SEAL, you know. And he turns to us and says, oh, isn't it curious that people are showing up in this cold winter weather to take a walk in the desert? He puts on his backpack and heads towards some rocks in the distance, which would serve as a perfect observation post. Another time we went there, and a beefy Marine Corps drill instructor type shows up at Jumbo Rocks, and he's got all these cameras that he's set up, supposedly to film nature. But every time we turn our heads and we're away from him, he was on the other side of the Jumbo Rocks parking lot. Every time we turn our heads, he turns the cameras towards us and starts filming.
My goodness.
It was so funny because between us was in the Jumbo Rocks parking lot were the outhouses. And so I said to my coworkers, don't worry, he's not carrying out surveillance. He's probably doing a book called The Great Outhouses of the Southwest, and this is his chapter on Joshua Tree National, because he kept filming the outhouses which were between us and him. So it was kind of a joke. But we were under surveillance. Other people who were part of that investigation on that were filmed as they entered into the park. We were too. An elderly gentleman with a camera, click, 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 and then like any insurance investigator would drop it to his side. So they were in surveillance mode. We'd show up to surveil sites, and there would be muscular young men who looked like intelligence officers checking out the sites that we had discussed we were going to on the phone.
Yes.
So, but on the other hand, what we were doing was perfectly legal, and if the national security state wants to send looky-loos to check out our contact work, hey, maybe you guys are going to learn something. Why not?
Well, it also always begs difference. It's like, well, if it's not real, if it's not any of that, why would they even bother to send anybody? You know,
it is
wasn't
real.
Well, no, I'm saying for the people who believe in their dogma of, oh, this is just all just science fiction, for those people, this is a good statement for them of going, well, gee, if you believe their dogma, which is this isn't real, then why would they care?
Why are they? Yeah, the most shocking example of that kind of surveillance happened in the first couple of weeks of our work. So we're in this pass adjacent to a national Department of Energy site where they tested the original rockets for the space shuttle, and where lots of other programs, presumably also related to Star Wars and attempts to shoot down satellites or even ETs. So we found ourselves doing field work adjacent to the Department of Energy site, okay, where we subsequently found out there were major sightings occurred, including saucers that landed or hovered at that facility. I had a patient who told me how he had encountered a saucer while working as a maintenance engineer at that Department of Energy base. We didn't know that at this time. We just happened, supposedly by chance, were led to this location. And we had seen a number of red orbs going up and down. Rocky Peak State Park is across the road from the Department of Energy site, just to the north of it. So we were hiking up this mountain path, going towards Rocky Peak, and one of my coworkers, Dr. Daniel, gets on what was the first cell phones they had. It looked like a walkie-talkie. It was really big. Yeah. And he talked into it, and he said something very curious. I had this sense that maybe he shouldn't be talking about it on the radio. He said, we're up here at Rocky Peak State Park next to the Department of Energy site across the road. We're doing the contact protocols from the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial, and even mentioned Dr. Greer's name.
Oh, wow.
And we're vectoring in spacecraft. That was, the ambitious term we used to describe our activities. And I was thinking, maybe you should be talking about that on the radio. He was calling his wife, who subsequently joined our team. She was an immunologist, one of the 3 physicians we had on our team. Anyway, about 45 minutes later, as we get to Rocky Peak, we've completed a meditation on some rocks, and we look down along the ravine through which the path was that led us there, and we hear a sound, boom, 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 and then we see 2 large Black Hawk helicopters flying with collision lights only, none of the, just 2 little tiny lights, and they're following the path that we had just walked as if they're in search mode.
Yeah, that sounds like search.
We then subsequently found out that those helicopters were tracked in the Los Angeles basin by the MUFON research director, who in Hollywood heard them come over his house. He later reported that he thought they were on counter-terrorist mission because they were flying right above the treetops. Very low in violation of FAA. This is heavily populated area. They then flew across the San Fernando Valley. One of the doctors in our medical group picked them up and saw them turn north towards the Santa Susana Pass. So they had flown about 35, 40 miles, probably from the Tustin, then Marine Air Station. So they were tracked across the San Fernando Valley, across the basin. And the 45 to 50 minutes that elapsed was just about the amount of time that they might need if they scrambled came after the phone call. Wow. So these guys were ready. And because there were UFO sightings before at that base, they probably were prepared to do just that, check it out with a scene. These 2 Black Hawks then started flying over the rocks where we had been meditating. And I thought, how did they know that? Then I realized heat signatures. We'd been lying on the rocks. We'd heated them up with our bodies. Oh, wow. The helicopter then turned around and started heading right towards us. Yes. And I'd been seeing so many James Bond movies that I actually thought that if we hid in the rocks, they wouldn't see us, because they have night vision, guy. They can see us perfectly. So we're hiding in the rocks, kind of looking out, it's like in the James, and they flew right over us. And then one of them went up to this observation station on one of the hills, and they flew around. The noise was tremendous. In contrast to that sighting that I described with those circus-like helicopters, the roar was deafening. I mean, these are big, powerful helicopters. So after the event, Dr. Daniel, who's many of his patients were in the Simi Valley, he asked them that last Tuesday night, did you hear anything unusual? And they said, are you kidding? There were these Black Hawk helicopters that were waking the whole community up. They were so loud that they were waking people up in the valley below. And he asked them, well, is this something that happens on a regular basis, quote, routine, quote, training mission? And his patients said, no, this has never happened before. So this is not coincidence. They were checking us out, perhaps the way they've checked out other anomalous phenomena. In our case, it was people seeking contact with UFOs rather than real physical objects that show up that can be picked up on radar and are considered a threat to this Department of Energy site. So,
well, thank you for sharing so much.
Right.
That is absolutely mind-boggling. I'll be thinking about it all day.
Oh, fine. I hope you guys have me back for some future program.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much. So if you would like to, Dr. Burkes has a new book out, yes?
Well, I have several books that I'm co-authoring. I recommend Paths to Contact. The first 50 pages are my stories, Contact, and it's by Jeff Becker, B-E-C-K-E-R. It's called Paths to Contact, True Stories from the Contact Underground. And then you can also get Beyond UFOs, which is put out by the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounter Experiences, I should say. That's FREE. And that book, Beyond UFOs, in Chapter 6, Dr. Burkes, myself, and Preston Dennett have written up 10 cases of people who claim to have, these are amazing cases of healings as a result of their contact with extraterrestrials. The free study was the largest study of its kind, the only academically designed questionnaire, and over 3,800 people responded to that. And on the basis of those responses, we have very accurate information about the contact experience, not just from people who claim to be abductees, but it turns out the overwhelming majority of people who responded to that in-depth questionnaire that was over 600 questions long,
that is great.
The overwhelming majority of people had either a very positive experience with their what they call extraterrestrials or a neutral experience. So the people who have so-called abduction experience in a large study turn out to be a very small percentage. Only about 9, depending on how you ask the question, 9 to 15% have had really negative experiences. And even those who have had negative experiences over time, if they've had only 1 or 2 abductions, the percentage of people who deem this horrific is relatively large compared to people who have had 5, 10, 15, or over 20 experiences. When you ask those experiencers who've had multiple memories of onboard experiences, the percentage drops off, indicating to us that when people are having the initial experience, it's shocking, it's frightening just by the strangeness, but as they become more accustomed to it, they realize that their interactions can be quite positive. I mentioned healings, also spiritual messages, that sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. We look forward to having you all back again sometime. And thank you for watching. Join us next time. Bye.